This Steve Jones Show podcast is now loading. The Steve Jones Show podcast is presented by Sunbury Motor Company, Purdy Insurance, Brewers Outlet, and NIL Game Changers. Bringing you an in-depth look at Penn State sports and more. This is the Steve Jones Show on News Radio 1070 WKOK. The Steve Jones Show is presented by Purdy Insurance, Brewers Outlet, and Sunbury Motor Company. Now from the Sunbury Motor Studio, here's Steve Jones.
Glad you're with us. Half hour being brought to you by our good friends at Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street in Sunbury, the beverage supermarket, imports, domestics, microbrews. The best selection of beer anywhere. Wine coolers, water, soft drink, snacks. They roast their peanuts fresh and out every day. And the pickle bar, led by the world-famous Barrels and Dills, indeed second to none. All at Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street in Sunbury, the beverage supermarket. Time to bring in Bob Flounders, PennLive.com. Bob, always a pleasure, my friend. Great to have you back with us.
Hey, Steve, I just want to say that was a spirited ad you just did for Brewers Outlet. You're a man after my own heart. I appreciate that. If I was any closer to where you guys were, I'd probably stop in.
That's the entire idea of it. Oh, that's great, Bob. All right, so it's bounce back time for this team. So body of work to this point. The body of work is 8 games to this point. We know it's 7-1. What's been the positive part of the body of work? What's the part of the body of work that would have you concerned?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the things that stand out to me are a couple of things. You know, it didn't always show up in the Ohio State loss, but I really do believe the development of Drew Aller in his second year, Steve. He's made some awfully big plays when they've needed him to. I think he's a more confident player. I think that I think he's a player that's not afraid to make mistakes. He's definitely not the same player he was last year. He's become a more complete quarterback, not only at the line of scrimmage, but also with his mobility, whether it's running or just extending plays. I think that is a big, big positive. I also think a storyline that I think is a little bit under the radar is they lost 3 really good offensive linemen, and I feel pretty good about what I've seen from this offensive line. Nick Dawkins, big guy owned. Anthony Donko, when healthy, right? I think those guys have been very good. I did not see Tyler Warren's season coming the way that it is played out. I know he's one of the better tight ends in the country. I thought that coming in, but I didn't believe he would be the best tight end in the country. That, to me, is noteworthy. Other assistant coaches, Terry Smith, Anthony Poindexter, Deion Barnes. I think I could not have gone more smoothly, Steve. That was a pretty good defensive mind that they lost. But I think the key moment was Tom Allen going up into the coaching booth where he can kind of call the game better. I think Dan Connor has done a good job communicating to the defense from the sideline. Yeah. They lost one of the best safeties in the country, and Zakee Wheatley and especially Jalen Reed. Those guys, Jalen Reed is worthy of All-American considerations. Zakee Wheatley might be in line for some All-Big Ten consideration as well. Those are the positives, I think, that really I also think you have to give Ryan Barker credit. Yeah. Coming off the bench, and he hasn't missed a field goal yet. That's kind of a big deal. They'd have 2 losses if not for Ryan Barker, because they wouldn't have won the USC game. Right. And I just think the things that are compelling to me that really have not gone well are two things. The running game just has not been the same since the end of September. I don't know how you feel about it. I don't think Nick Singleton is completely healthy. I don't know that for a fact, but the running numbers are the running numbers. He's not the same explosive player as a runner. He's still doing damage as a passer, but I think as a receiver, excuse me, Steve. But I do think that has had an effect on the entire offense and the way Andy Kotelnicki calls the game. And I would also say this. I think the wideouts are better, but against really tough competition like Ohio State, the wideouts still aren't where they need to be. So to me, those are the storylines for a team that's got one loss. They played very hard against, I would still put Ohio State near the very top of the list of the best teams in the country. I'm not so sure they're not if they play error-free. But I think this played very hard. They had some breaks that did not go their way. But to be 7-1 and to have played on the road like they have, Steve, against some pretty tough teams, I think if you're a Penn State fan, I'm disappointed about last week. But I think this team, considering all the talent that they lost and some of the coordinators that they lost, I think this team has really, really gotten better as the season's progressed. And I do expect them to win their final 4 regular season games.
All right. So you mentioned Singleton in that. Singleton has worked very hard to become a better receiver. And you can just see in hand placement, instead of being a body catcher, the hand placement's now out. All right. Whatever his situation is, what does it mean to the offense to get that kind of guy at least in space in the passing game?
Yeah, he is one of the better pass catching backs in the Big Ten. I mean, I don't know how many teams throw to their backs, but Steve, this is really something. I think if you go back to the last couple of games of 2023 when they made the coordinator change and Ty Hal and Jaywan Sider were running the offense, the last couple of games, they made a conscious effort to get the ball in the hands of their best players in space. And I think part of that was getting Nick Singleton in space. It's not always hard to do that when he's running the ball against Big Ten defenses. There's just not that many. There's just not that much room, especially against the better defenses. But in space, if he's only got to make one guy miss with his athleticism, he's a sure-handed kid. In space, he becomes a more dynamic player. And I do think his role as a receiver has vastly improved. Right. He's also very good in pass protection, which is an overlooked thing unless you're an NFL team or an NFL scout. Mm-hmm. But I think, though, that is kind of, if you're Kotelnicki and you're Drew Aller, and maybe he's not quite physically right, and again, I'm not saying I know this for sure, I'm just telling you how it looks when he runs the ball. I am definitely committed to getting him the ball as a receiver at least 4 or 5 times a game because he does make plays. He can get first downs. Drew Aller has his trust, and he's come a long way as a pass catcher at Penn State.
Abdul Carter at the defensive end spot. Linebacker last year, spends 75% of the game, maybe 80% of the game at defensive end. What have been your thoughts, Bob?
Boy, I mean, it was the right move. It was clearly the right move. I think you, as disruptive as he is, Steve, even when he was a linebacker, even his true freshman season and last year, when they set him on a list, let him kind of get up the field and not really worry about anything else. Not that he's not a great athlete and can impact the game in pass coverage. He's a devastating weapon. He doesn't, whether it's speed, whether it's power, whether it's converting speed to power. There are 300-pound offensive linemen that are very good that have just struggled with him. I just remember the West Virginia game, Steve. That left tackle for West Virginia, he might go in the first 2 rounds of the draft. I think his name's Wyatt Millen.
Yes, it is.
I don't think last year he allowed a sack. If you look at what Abdul did in that game, they got on him for his penalties, but whether he was rushing against Wyatt or whether it was rushing against the right tackle, he caused an awful lot of trouble, and he was still raw as a defensive end. They had to chip on him. They couldn't let their backs come out and catch passes, and he just missed on 2 or 3 sacks. And he's as the Big Ten season, as we've gotten deeper into it, every game, Steve, he is he's either very close to making a disruptive play or he's making several disruptive plays. And in that Ohio State game, he had a couple of real big plays, and it happens on every play, Penn State or Ohio State. There were a couple times they had to grab him, or he would have had maybe double the amount of sacks and disruptive plays that he did.
Right, exactly. The linebacking play to this point, especially not so much Tony Rojas, but Kobe King.
Yeah.
When you watch him and his development from where he was 2 years ago to where he is now, what are you seeing, Bob?
Well, I think on the list of most underrated players on the Penn State team, there's a lot of them, but he's in my top three. He is a guy that, as he's developed, he's a guy that I think if you're Penn State's defensive staff and you're his teammates, he's a guy that he's always going to have the defense in the right spot, and he's also a guy that you don't really have to worry about. He's such a physical presence when it comes to stopping the run. And Penn State, they've seen some pretty good running backs this year, and sometimes, really good running backs. But there's also that game. He's a good running back. He didn't do much there. I think Kobe King is getting more and more well-rounded as a player, and I think that's critical for him if he wants to play at the next level. It's so hard. I talked to Dan Connor yesterday on a conference call. He was saying, you know what, 20 years ago, myself and Paul Puzzle, not that much to think about when we were out there. It was a different game. There was no RPOs. There was no spread. So we could see it and react to it. You can't do that really anymore if you're a linebacker. They're gonna spread you out. They're gonna try and confuse you. They're gonna throw it more than they run it. And the checklist, Dan Connor essentially said, makes it crazy hard to be a three-down linebacker, even a two-down linebacker, because they throw on first down. I think Kobe King is one of the underrated players, not only on the Penn State team, but in the Big Ten. He's a guy that I think that James Franklin and Tom Allen trust, and that's not something that's easy to do. But they're playing at a high level for a number of reasons on defense. I think Kobe King really is one of them, and I don't think you really, unless you're watching the game in person and not on TV, you don't see all the stuff that he does for Penn State.
This is an odd situation because it's the whiteout. That's fine. It's Washington, right? Name opponent in a whiteout. But the game's on Peacock. What were your thoughts when you saw how that played out, Bob?
My thoughts were this was a money decision. The networks are paying a lot of money to get the right to call the games they want to call, and I mean Peacock has had some games featuring some pretty good Big Ten teams on previously this season, but if you're a television network, whether it's NBC or it's Peacock, you get a chance to pick a Penn State whiteout game, you would have to be insane to pass on it. Right. It's a new dynamic. I think the fans are still adjusting to just really how much college football is TV dependent because of the financial considerations, but it's not going away. And a game like this, really, Steve, it goes hand in hand with Fox and the big noon kickoff, wanting all of the best Penn State games, if it's their choice, to be early in the day. And, a couple of years ago, it's 2019 or it's 2021 or whatever it is, and it's Fox's turn. This game's probably not going to – the Penn State-Ohio State game or the Penn State-Michigan game, it's not necessarily going to be a day game. It's going to be a night game. But it's the world we live in. They're paying the Big Ten a lot of money. And I think as we go on, Steve, I think Penn State fans are just going to have to learn to live with it.
Well, I know they have to learn to live with it because they're going to have no choice with it. It's just, and I know that this is the particular of all the weekends. Notre Dame's playing its night game with Florida State. Thus, NBC is carrying that game. That did play a role in this, but to put it on streaming, you're like. I realize it's the world we live in, but man, that just to me, maybe it's the old timer in me coming out, just doesn't feel right.
Yeah, this isn't going to be the last time I think it happens. It definitely won't be. But it's just tough to kind of reconcile the fact that a whiteout game is going to be on a stream, network essentially. It's a weird feeling, but Steve, it's a pretty weird world.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to say it. We're living in a weird world. That's it, and a lot. There's in a wide variety of areas. Sure. What have you? Part of that is 18 teams in the Big Ten and 4 in the West Coast. That's part of the weird world we live in. This will be the third one of those that Penn State has played. What has been your thought on the expansion, at least in the initial read of it?
I think it makes sense to me. They added 4 blue chip, brands.
Yep.
The Big Ten. I think it will pay off down the road. UCLA and USC are not what they have been.
Right.
But I think in the world of the transfer portal and NIL, I think that can change pretty quickly. You can rebuild on the fly a lot easier. Steve, I'm still trying to figure out the USC team from afar. They only know how to lose hotly contested, controversial games. It might be one of the better teams. I think they have a losing record, and I'm scratching my head after watching them play Penn State, to the bitter end. But I think the expansion's been good. I also think, I will say this, Steve, I think it's been a bigger adjustment for the West Coast teams for now coming east than the East Coast teams going west, just because of the time change. And I really don't agree, Steve, with I know why they do it. I don't really agree with TV putting West Coast teams on in a noon window on the East Coast. I just think it's a pretty big disadvantage to them. And I hope moving forward, I don't feel like that's necessarily a fair playing field. I know travel is what it is, and that's kind of I think teams will look at travel a different way when they're going moving forward, if they're going to go across the country, whether it's flying out a day earlier or something like that. But it's a tight turnaround to play a really, really physical sport and then have to get on a plane and immediately go back and fly 6 hours across the country. This is another thing that I think they're going to have to let the teams maybe stay if they're traveling cross country a little longer, just so their bodies can adjust, and they don't have to get on a plane after playing, a night game and then fly back across the country. It doesn't make sense to me, but I do think in year one there were going to be some things that needed to be ironed out. That's one of them. But I do think moving forward it will be a smoother experience.
Yeah, no, I think it's, to me, I love it. I think it's been great. I think they do have to iron out a few things. And by the way, Washington's flying in today, just so everybody knows. And the reason they're flying in today is because the game is tomorrow night at 8/5 Pacific time. He says they feel they can do this instead of coming in on Thursday like they did at Iowa and Indiana. So, all right, Bob, always a pleasure. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow.
Steve, it's always a pleasure to write back at you. Keep doing those beer distributor ads. I'm an avid fan. I'll be on your show anytime, and I'll see you tomorrow as well.
Thanks, Bob. And this half hour, just to make sure Bob has a complete understanding, is brought to you by Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street in Sunbury, the beverage supermarket here on News Radio 1070 WKOK.
Hi, this is Season. For over 100 years, the Purdy Insurance Agency has been protecting families and businesses of the greater Susquehanna Valley and beyond. With the experience of our trained and knowledgeable staff, you can rest assured that your needs will be evaluated and met by some of the industry's best representatives. No matter what your insurance needs are, call Purdy Insurance today at 570-286-5855. Visit our website at purdyinsurance.com or check us out on Facebook to see what we can do for you.
Party time, game time, or just fun time. Doesn't matter what time it is because it's Brewers Outlet time. The Beverage Supermarket has the area's largest beer selection. Imports, microbrews, ciders, and domestics. Pick from over 100 ice-cold 12-packs and dozens of 24-ounce singles. Soda, snacks, hot sauces, fresh roasted peanuts. Make it one-stop party shopping, and don't forget the pickle bar. So whatever you're celebrating or just doing it up, Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street, Sunbury wants to see you and thank you for your years of patronage.